Hi, I'm Ellison, and while I was living overseas, my grandfather died and left me his condo, $350,000. But by the time I came home, it was already gone. Sold. Not by a stranger, by my father. And when I asked why, my mother called me greedy. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing it wasn't a mistake. It was planned, slow, quiet. A betrayal years in the making. They called me unstable, unfit, but they forgot who raised me, and what he left behind would make even them tremble. The email came in at 3:17 a.m. Berlin time. No greeting, no subject line, just a single sentence from my older brother, Grant. Grandpa passed, no service, FYI. I read it 3 times before I realized it wasn't a mistake. I sat on the edge of my bed, laptop still glowing, the radiator clicking in the dark. For a while, I just stared at the words, short, cold, and efficient. It felt like something from a stranger, not family. I called home. The line rang longer than it should have before my mother answered. "Oh, Ellison," she said, her tone clipped like she just remembered I existed. "Yes, it's true. It was quick. He didn't suffer." There was no tremor in her voice, no pause for grief, only the faint clinking of dishes in the background. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" I asked. "You've got your work, your life over there," she said, like that explained everything. "We didn't think you'd want to fly all the way back for, well, you know how he was, private." "He raised me," I said quietly. "He wasn't just private." She didn't respond to that. I could hear my father's voice somewhere behind her, muffled, saying something about let it go. Then the call ended, not abruptly, but efficiently. For a moment, I sat there in the dark, the hum of the heater filling the silence. My grandfather's voice came back to me from a conversation years ago, the last one we had before I moved to Germany. "What's mine one day will be yours," he'd said, his hands rough and warm on my shoulder. "But be careful, Ellison. Not all inheritance is a gift." I hadn't known what he meant back then, but now, those words itched in my skull. By noon, I'd booked a flight. My boss didn't argue when I said I needed unpaid leave. He knew me well enough to understand when not to ask questions. When I landed in Chicago, the air felt sharper than I remembered. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through my coat as I walked through the familiar streets of Lincoln Square. Late autumn, leaves plastered to the pavement, gray skies pressing low. Thanksgiving decorations already hung in store windows, all cheer and warmth that didn't reach me. The condo was gone. Not the building itself. That still stood, but it wasn't ours anymore. The nameplate had changed, the window curtains were new, and children's toys cluttered the front stoop. A woman I didn't recognize opened the door halfway when I hesitated near the steps. "Can I help you?" she asked. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "I used to know someone here." I didn't look long. I couldn't. I turned away before she shut the door, and my reflection in the glass, thinner, older, distant, stared back at me. That night, I drove to my parents' house in Evanston, the same split level I'd grown up in, though the paint had faded and the shrubs were trimmed too neatly, like even nature wasn't allowed to breathe there. My father answered the door, wearing the same cardigan he'd worn since before I left for college. His eyes scanned me from shoes to hair, judging the years I'd been gone. "You look tired," he said. "Too much work?" "I just got off a flight," I replied. "I heard about Grandpa. I also heard the condo's been sold." He shrugged, motioning me inside. "You've got a good life overseas. You don't need to worry about that place." "That place," I repeated, my voice tightening. It was his home. He left it to me. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. We thought you'd understand, Ellison. You're doing fine. Your brother needed the money more than you. Don't be greedy. The word hit me like a slap. Greedy? I said. You sold something that wasn't yours. Don't make this ugly, she said, her voice soft but cold. Family shouldn't fight over things. I'm not fighting over things, I said. I'm fighting over what's right. My father turned away, signaling the conversation was over. We did what we thought was best. Let's leave it there. I stood in the living room, the smell of lemon polish and old carpet pressing around me. My mother's eyes flicked toward the clock. She wanted me gone before dinner, so I left. Outside, the sky had already darkened. The streetlights glowed weakly through the drizzle. I walked down the sidewalk with my hands in my pockets and felt the old brass key still hanging on my keychain, the one to my grandfather's condo. No one had asked for it back. The next morning, I found the name I was looking for, Marlon Quaid, my grandfather's lawyer. His office was still downtown, above an antique bookstore. I remembered going there as a kid, how Marlon always smelled of peppermint and ink. He looked older now, his frame smaller, but his eyes sharp as ever. Ellison Rourke, he said, shaking my hand. Been a while, son. I heard about your father's quick sale. You here to talk about that? I nodded. He poured me a cup of tea, sat across from me, and opened a thick folder with the Rourke family name embossed on the front. He pulled out a yellowing envelope sealed in wax. This, he said, sliding it across the desk, is your grandfather's original will. I watched as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. His eyes moved down the page slowly, then stopped. His brow furrowed. He leaned back, exhaled sharply through his nose. That idiot, he muttered. My pulse spiked. What is it? He looked up at me, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. If this is what I think it is, he said, lowering his voice, they're in trouble. Marlon's words hung in the air long after I left his office. The echo of them, they're in trouble, followed me down the creaking stairwell and out into the street. Chicago's wind hit harder that day, colder, sharper. Trouble. He hadn't said who, but I didn't need him to. Back at the small apartment I'd rented near Wrigleyville, I spread everything out on the kitchen table. The photocopy of my grandfather's will, my father's update, an old birthday card Grandpa had signed for me years ago. I ran my thumb over the loops of his handwriting, steady, deliberate, then compared it to the scrawled signature on the so-called new version. They didn't match, not even close. Grandpa's name had always leaned forward slightly, as if pulled by purpose. The one on the fake was slanted back, timid, uneven. Whoever signed it didn't know him, not the way I did. I sent Marlon a text. They forged it, didn't they? His reply came a minute later. Don't jump ahead. Let me look deeper. Stay quiet for now. Let them feel safe. That's when they slip. I stared at that message, the glow from the phone lighting my hands. Stay quiet. It had always been my role in this family. The quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't make scenes. But for the first time, silence felt like a weapon I could use. A few days later, the call came. My mother's voice again, clipped, polite, strained. Your father thought it would be nice if you came for dinner. Tomorrow night. Bennett will be there too. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. The next evening I drove to Evanston. The air had a bite to it. That kind of cold that gets under your nails. The house looked smaller somehow, the lights too bright, the curtains drawn tight. My brother's car, a new Lexus, was parked perfectly in the driveway, like it owned the place. Bennett greeted me at the door with a smirk that hadn't aged a day. "Well, look who finally made time for family," he said. Inside, the table was already set. My father at the head, my mother moving dishes like a hostess trapped in her own play. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, familiar but heavy. "Good to see you, son," my father said, though his tone was more formal than warm. "It's been too long." "I was here last week," I said. He ignored that. "Your mother made your favorite. You always liked her mashed potatoes." I took my seat across from Bennett. He was scrolling through his phone until my father cleared his throat. Then he set it down like it had burned him. "So," my father began, carving the chicken with careful precision, "I knew Grandpa's death would bring the worst out of people. Money does that." Bennett chuckled, shaking his head. "You show up now because there's money on the table? Classic Ellison move." My mother's fork clinked too hard against her plate. "Bennett," she said, too late to matter. I kept my voice even. "I came because I heard something wasn't right." "Right," my father said, wiping his hands. "You heard something from that old lawyer, didn't you? Marlon's been sticking his nose where it doesn't belong for decades." "He's doing his job," I said. "His job," my father repeated, looking amused. "His job ended when your grandfather signed over the property. We handled everything by the book." I leaned back slightly, studying their faces. Interesting. Who witnessed the new will? The question landed like a stone. My father's knife froze halfway through the next cut. Bennett reached for his drink. My mother stared at her plate. "No one," I said softly. "That's odd." Bennett finally spoke. "Don't start, Ellison. You've been gone 10 years. You don't know what you're talking about. I know a forged signature when I see one." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My father's jaw tightened. "You're accusing your family of fraud?" "I'm asking for honesty," I said. "That's all I've ever asked for. Honesty." My mother's voice cracked like thin ice. "You think we wanted to sell it? Your brother's been struggling since the layoffs. We thought it was fair. You have your own life, your work. You don't need this burden." Burden. That's what they called my grandfather's legacy. I looked at her, this woman who'd once packed my lunches, and now spoke of fairness, like it was currency. "You sold something that wasn't yours to sell." Her eyes darted to my father. "Roland, please." He raised his hand. "Enough. We're not doing this. The matter's closed." "Not yet," I said quietly. I stood, leaving my plate untouched. Bennett muttered something under his breath as I passed. I didn't catch it. Didn't need to. Outside, the cold hit harder than before. I sat in the car, engine off, breath fogging the windshield. My phone buzzed. A text from Marlon. "Check your email." I opened it right there, my fingers stiff. A single attachment. A photo of a county record page. The subject line read, "Something you should see." The image showed the property ledger for my grandfather's condo. Under probate court filing, the space was blank. No record number, no executor. Then a message from Marlon followed. "Will never entered probate. No executor appointed." Technically, the sale was illegal. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Illegal. I leaned back, my heart beating slow and heavy. The sound of wind outside filled the car. And then it hit me. Not anger, not shock, but clarity. If this whole thing was off the books, there had to be someone else who knew. Someone who'd seen the paperwork move through. Someone with nothing left to lose. And suddenly, I knew exactly who I needed to find. So I drove, early the next morning, before the streets fully woke up. The city hadn't shaken off the frost yet. Trees stood bare. Streetlights still blinked yellow like they weren't sure if it was morning or not. I pulled into the lot behind my grandfather's old condo building in Edgewater, same spot he used to park. The lines were faded now, barely visible under the scattered brown leaves. For a second, I sat there. No music, no engine, just me in the air that still smelled like burnt coffee and whatever peach-scented cleaner the janitor always overused. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear him again. My grandfather humming Coltrane while fumbling with his keys, complaining about the mail always being late. When I stepped out of the car, my feet crunched over the gravel and a gust of wind cut across the lot, stinging my ears. I adjusted my coat collar and headed to the side entrance, then up 2 flights of stairs to apartment 2B. I hesitated before knocking. Trina Lang hadn't returned any of my messages. For all I knew, she'd moved. Or maybe she'd answer and slam the door in my face. Still, I knocked, twice, firm but not aggressive. There was a pause. Then the door creaked open, just a few inches. A woman's eyes met mine through the gap. Tired, sharp, and not the least bit surprised. "I thought someone from your family would show up eventually," she said. "Didn't think it'd be you." "I wasn't sure I'd come either," I admitted. She opened the door wider, stepping aside. "You got 5 minutes. Use them well." Trina hadn't changed much. A little grayer around the temples, a bit thinner maybe, but her spine was still straight, her expression unreadable, the kind of woman who'd seen too much and said too little. The apartment was warm, but not cozy. Sparse, a small couch, a clean table, a blanket folded neatly on a chair, no pictures on the wall, no TV, just silence and the hum of a nearby radiator. I stood awkwardly while she poured 2 cups of tea, sliding one across the table without asking how I took it. "I didn't come to stir things up," I said. "I only just got back from Germany. Found out about Grandpa through an email." She gave a dry laugh. "Figures." "He meant a lot to me," I added. "More than they ever understood." Trina's face softened, just slightly. She sat down across from me. "So, you didn't know?" "Didn't know what?" "That I was fired a week before he died?" I shook my head. "No, no one told me anything." She leaned back, arms crossed. "I was with him 5 days a week for 3 years. Grocery runs, doctor visits, medication. That last month, he was off, nervous, distracted." "What happened?" Her eyes narrowed. "He started saying things about your dad, about pressure. Said someone was trying to make him sign papers. I asked him straight out, and he didn't deny it." My chest tightened. "And when you brought it up?" "Next day, I was out. No explanation. Just, your services are no longer needed." She glanced toward a drawer in the side table. "That's when I saved the voicemail." "You have a voicemail from him?" Trina didn't answer. She stood, opened the drawer, and pulled out a cheap flip phone wrapped in a paper napkin. She pressed a few buttons and handed it to me. I listened. "Trina, I think I did something dumb. Roland said it was just a formality, but I don't know. I feel wrong. I shouldn't have signed anything. I don't want Ellison left out. He's the only one who ever asked how I'm doing. I'm tired, Trina. I'm just so tired." The message ended with a click. I sat there, holding the phone like it might burn through my hand. My throat felt like sandpaper. There's more, she said quietly. About a week before that voicemail, he gave me something, told me to keep it safe, said you'd need it if anything ever happened. Trina walked to her bedroom, came back with a worn manila folder. Inside was a photocopy of the original will. His signature, real, familiar, the same steady loop I'd seen 100 times, and my name, clearly typed, as sole heir to the condo. My hands shook. I stared at the paper like it might disappear. It was all there, clear, legal, unaltered. No one knows you have this? I asked. No one but you now, she said. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I should have even told you. Why'd you? Trina looked at me, really looked at me. Because when I opened that door, you didn't look like a man chasing money. You looked like someone who got left behind. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Instead, I turned away slightly, trying to swallow the weight pressing on my chest, the warmth of the tea, the buzz of the radiator, the echo of his voice still ringing in my ear. I didn't cry for the condo. I didn't even cry for the betrayal. I cried because for the first time in years, I knew I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't made it up. I wasn't paranoid or dramatic or too sensitive, like they'd always told me. He had loved me. He had chosen me. And they'd buried that truth like it was inconvenient. I wiped my face quickly, trying to pull myself together. But something had cracked open. Something that had been held shut for far too long. Trina didn't say anything more. She just refilled my tea and let me sit in it. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just the forgotten son. I was holding the truth, and it was loaded like a weapon. I drove to Oak Park that Saturday afternoon with a calmness I didn't recognize in myself. Maybe it was the way the light hit the streets, soft and gray, like even the sun didn't feel like showing up. Or maybe it was knowing that, for once, I wasn't coming empty-handed. Mom had called that morning asking me to come by for coffee. Her voice had that syrupy tone she used when she was trying to sound warm, a tone she hadn't used with me in years. I almost declined, but something in me said, "Go." If nothing else, it had saved me the trouble of planning the confrontation. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Bennett's car parked out front. Sleek, polished, like him. I smirked. So it wasn't just coffee, it was theater, and I was meant to be the audience. I knocked once before walking in. Mom met me at the door, apron still on, the smell of cinnamon lingering behind her like cheap perfume. "Ellison," she said, smiling too tightly. "You're right on time." "Guess I always was good at being punctual," I replied, stepping inside. The living room hadn't changed. Beige walls, neatly aligned family portraits, the kind of place where nothing out of place ever lasted long. Except for me. Dad sat on the edge of the recliner, hands folded, jaw tight. Bennett leaned on the fireplace mantel, sipping what looked like scotch. Because, of course, he brought his own scotch to a coffee invite. "Ellison," Bennett greeted me. "This a social call, or you finally here to make peace?" I didn't answer. I sat down at the far end of the couch, pulled a folder from my coat pocket, and slid a paper across the coffee table. No words, no build-up, just the will. Dad grabbed it first. His eyes scanned it quickly, then slower. Mom leaned in, squinting. Bennett kept sipping, but the smirk on his face slipped a little. "It's a copy," I said quietly, "of the original will, the one Grandpa filed before everything got messy." Dad scoffed, tossing the paper onto the table like it burned him. "That's not legal. That's just paper." Mom's voice went cold. "Ellison, is this a joke? Are you trying to stir up trouble now that he's gone? You think I forged that? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, I haven't seen anything from a lawyer, Bennett chimed in. And frankly, if this was real, you wouldn't be bringing it up over Mom's coffee. I leaned back. Trina Lang has the voicemail. That shut them up. She kept it. Grandpa told her someone was pressuring him. He was confused, scared, but very clear he didn't want me left out. He knew something was off. Mom's fork, she'd been picking at pie slices she didn't eat, hit her plate hard enough to clink. Dad stood up. You're twisting an old man's words. He wasn't well. You know that. Bennett rolled his eyes. He probably thought you were someone else. I didn't flinch. He named me. He gave the will to Trina. And she gave it to me. Dad paced, hands on his hips. You think this is what he wanted? You think that condo meant more than this family? He was losing grip, Elle. He didn't know which day of the week it was half the time. You don't get to rewrite him just because he's gone, I said. He wasn't senile. He was surrounded by people who treated him like a burden. I called him every week, even from overseas. He remembered that. There was a moment of silence. Then Dad said, he was going to donate that property to the church. I stopped that. I kept it in the family. I stood up, slow and steady. No, you kept it for the family, the one that fits your version of it. Bennett set his glass down. You really going to drag us all into court over a 2-bedroom condo? I didn't blink. A lawyer is filing Monday. You should prepare. Mom whispered, Ellison, don't do this. I turned toward her. You already did. Then I walked out. Outside, the air bit harder. I welcomed it. I pulled out my phone and hit Marlon's number. He picked up on the second ring. You ready? They know, I said. Didn't even try that hard to lie. Good, he said. The will's solid. We can move. This just got very real. I hung up and stood at the edge of the driveway, watching the last of the light fade behind the row of oak trees. My breath curled in the cold air. Everything was finally moving. But I didn't expect Bennett to come knocking the next day, with an offer that smelled like blood. It was just past 9 on Sunday morning when the knock came. Deliberate, too steady for a neighbor or a delivery guy. Outside, rain tapped a quiet rhythm on my apartment window, and the smell of old coffee hung in the air. I hadn't even bothered to change out of my sweatshirt. When I opened the door, Bennett stood there like he'd been waiting forever. Tailored coat, leather gloves, hair still combed like he was headed to a board meeting instead of barging into my 1-bedroom apartment. Mind if I come in? He asked, already stepping over the threshold. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. He looked around with that mild disgust people try to hide behind a tight smile, like he'd walked into something beneath him but was too polite to say it out loud. He dropped a manila envelope on my kitchen counter, then leaned back against a bar stool like he owned the place. You don't get much light in here, he said. Guess Germany made you used to gray. I walked over slowly, eyeing the envelope, but not touching it. What's this? A way out, Bennett replied, before this turns into something messy. He unfastened the flap and slid out 2 documents. One was a typed non-disclosure agreement. The other was a check. $40,000, neat and clean. I didn't move, just stared. Bennett continued, You walk away now. No lawsuits, no probate filings, no dragging the family name through the mud. You get to keep your dignity. 40 grand, tax-free. Not bad for something you didn't even know existed until 2 weeks ago. I picked up the papers, flipped through them like they were a grocery list. My heart stayed steady. I kept my breath even. Did Dad write this? I asked. Or was this your idea? He didn't flinch. Does it matter? It does to me. Bennett's smile thinned. Elle, come on. You're not built for this. You never were. You think you've got some righteous mission here, but this isn't a movie. You sue us. We countersue. We'll make it about your mental state, your drinking, that stint you had in therapy. You want to air that in court? I didn't react. That's what he hated most, when I didn't play the part. You've always been the outsider, he continued. Even Grandpa knew it. He pitied you, sure. But this? He gestured toward the check. This is respect, a payout, not a handout. Still silent, I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled down an old notebook. Black leather, creased along the spine, the corners frayed. I flipped to the back, where I knew it would be. Grandpa's handwriting, scrawled but unmistakable, for the one who never asked for anything, but deserved everything. I walked back over, placed the notebook next to the check. You think this is about money? I said quietly. It never was. Bennett's mouth opened, but no words came. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even touch the check. Get out, I said. You had your chance to keep this quiet. His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He just scooped up the envelope, check and all, and walked to the door. As he opened it, he looked back once. You don't know what you're starting. I met his eyes. Neither do you. The door shut behind him with a finality that hung in the air. I stood still for a moment, letting the silence fill the room again, until only the soft ticking of the wall clock remained. Then I took out my phone and dialed Marlon. He answered with a tired voice. Morning. I'm sending you something, I said. NDA and a bribe. From Bennett. There was a pause on the line. That wasn't a settlement offer, Marlon said finally. That was a warning shot. I knew he was right, because I wasn't the only one preparing. My father was already rewriting the next chapter behind my back. Marlon didn't say anything more after that call. He didn't need to. The silence between us said it all. We met up late that afternoon outside Cook County Courthouse. Both of us hunched against the drizzle like two men carrying more than umbrellas. The cold air bit through my jacket, but I barely felt it. I was wired, not with adrenaline, that had long since burned out, but with something colder, heavier. A sense that whatever came next wouldn't just define how this ended, but who I'd become in the process. Marlon handed me a file folder as we walked toward the courthouse steps. This is everything we need to initiate the petition. Once we file it, the probate court opens the inquiry, and the condo goes into a freeze. I nodded. Let's do it. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with quiet tension. That specific kind of pressure you only feel around courtrooms and funerals. We got in line. The clerk barely looked up until Marlon slid the documents across the counter. She paused, then reached under her desk and pulled out a second folder. There's already an emergency affidavit filed yesterday, she said flatly, handing it over. By Roland Rourke, opposing any probate activity. Marlon stiffened beside me. What? She shrugged. Stamped, filed. You'll have to respond formally. He moved fast. We stepped aside, and Marlon flipped open the folder. I looked over his shoulder. There it was. A new will, dated 3 weeks before Grandpa died. Everything, the condo, the savings, even the antique record collection, now belonged to Roland. My stomach turned. It's trash, Marlon muttered, pointing at the signature. Your grandfather didn't sign like this. Look at the strokes, shaky, inconsistent. He flipped to the witness lines. One of them was Trina Lang, but her last name was spelled Lang. Marlon shut the folder. Sloppy, desperate, but dangerous if we don't move quickly. We walked back to his car in silence. I slid into the passenger seat and stared at the rain bleeding down the windshield. It looked like the whole city was crying and trying to hide it. I pulled out my phone and opened old texts from my mother. You need to let the past be. Grandpa wanted peace, not division. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. At the time, I read them as comfort. Now they sounded like deflection, camouflage. She knew, maybe not every detail, but enough. They all did. Back at my apartment, I left my coat on, sat at the edge of the couch, and poured myself a glass of water with hands I didn't realize were shaking. I dropped it. The glass bounced once, then shattered on the hardwood. I didn't pick it up. I walked into my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of the old dresser, the one that still had masking tape on it from my move home. Inside was an ancient flip phone I hadn't touched since the year Grandpa died. I turned it on. The battery still had a flicker of life. One saved voicemail blinked back at me. I hit play. His voice was grainy, but clear enough to feel like he was right in the room. Elle, if anything ever happens, don't let your father decide. You were always the one with a good head. You're the only one who ever listened. That's why it should be you. I played it again, then again. By the third time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't numb. I was clear. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a stack of yellow legal pads. On the first page, I drew a circle in the center and wrote one word in bold capital letters: leverage. Then I started mapping it all out. Who knew what? Who said what? Who stood to gain? Who panicked first? This wasn't just about the condo. Not anymore. This was about erasing me from the story, from legacy, from memory, from truth. And the only way to stop it was to stop being the person they expected me to be. Because he thought I'd break. But I finally remembered who taught me to bend without snapping. I knew exactly who taught me to bend without snapping. Grandpa. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. But when he took a position, he held it like stone. So when I woke that morning, before the sun filtered through the blinds, before the coffee pot even sputtered to life, I knew what I had to do. I got out of bed slower than usual, not because I was tired, but because every step felt deliberate. I played that voicemail again. Grandpa's voice, soft and clear despite the old speaker. You were always the one with a good head. You listened. This time, I didn't cry. I smiled. I took a shower, pulled on my jacket, and slipped the folder into my bag. Copies of the falsified will, the original draft, the voicemail transcript, and the photo of Grandpa's signature from a utility bill the same month they claimed he was too frail to write. And then I went to see my mother. It was mid-morning when I got to the museum, the one where Karen Rourke had volunteered for years. Quiet place. Smelled like old wood and carpet cleaner. I found her near the glass case of antique coins. She didn't look surprised. She straightened a brochure rack and didn't look up. You shouldn't be here, Ellison. I took 2 steps in and stopped. I won't take long. You always say that. I've got one question. She finally turned. Ellison. Dad filed the affidavit before I even knew about the condo. So how did he know? Her lips stayed tight. No surprise, no emotion. I've got Trina's name spelled wrong in a will allegedly signed by a man who couldn't hold a pen straight. I've got a voicemail from Grandpa warning me not to let Dad make decisions. You know what that adds up to. She crossed her arms. It adds up to you thinking you're better than everyone. I'm just asking how he knew. She looked around. The front lobby was empty except for a high school volunteer on her phone. Karen stepped closer. You think that makes you better than us? You were always too soft to survive here, Elle. You couldn't cut it in this world. I held her gaze. No, I respected people who didn't deserve it. That's not the same thing. She looked away. You've always been dramatic. I've always been quiet. That was your mistake. I turned and left without another word. That afternoon, I met Marlon in his office just past lunch. The rain had started again, a heavy fall breeze pushing leaves across the sidewalk like a warning. His office was cramped but efficient, files stacked, phone buzzing, one intern typing furiously. We sat. I'm filing for injunction against the estate's closure, he said, sliding papers toward me. We've got evidence of intent, fraud, and motive, but I need to know. If we go this far, you understand there's no walking it back. I signed. Good, I said. I'm not interested in walking. Then I drove to Roland's office. It was in a brown brick building near the expressway. Polished windows, a generic company name on the door, Mid-State Realty Solutions. I walked past the front desk, straight to the door with his name on it. The receptionist stood up, but didn't stop me. Roland looked up from his desk, cool, measured, like he was already expecting a chess match. Ellison, he said, didn't think I'd see you in person. I pulled the letter from my bag and set it on his desk. He didn't open it. Not right away. Inside was a copy of the fraudulent will, the voicemail transcript, the image of Grandpa's signature, and one typed line at the bottom. You were sloppy, and I'm not afraid anymore. He finally slid the folder toward himself, glanced at the cover, then looked to his assistant. Get me Ryan at Channel 9, he said flatly. If he wants to play hardball, we'll make this boy look like a lunatic. I didn't blink. I didn't argue. I left the room without looking back. That was the moment the line broke, not just in the family, but in the air. Something shifted. I felt it in the way people looked at me on the sidewalk, in the way the wind picked up as I stepped outside. Because just like that, the war went public. Monday morning came cold and gray, the kind of fall day that felt like the wind had sharp edges. I rolled out of bed, shuffled into the kitchen, and let the coffee machine sputter to life. The air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. I hadn't even reached for my phone when I heard it. My name coming from the small TV above the fridge I usually kept on for background noise. Ellison Rourke, who has reportedly been estranged from his family for years, is now contesting the estate of his late grandfather, Roland Rourke Sr., claiming fraud and emotional abuse. I stood there, mug half full, heart suddenly pounding harder than I liked. On screen was a still shot of me from my college graduation. Awkward, eyes half closed. The reporter's voice was soft but pointed. Family insiders describe Ellison as emotionally fragile and frequently absent from family affairs. While the Rourke family has declined official comment, sources close to the situation say, this is a desperate attempt by a bitter relative to claim something never meant for him. They even found a neighbor to comment. I always thought he had a chip on his shoulder, the woman said, squinting like the sunlight had wronged her. Roland's a pillar in this community. This younger one, he just never fit. I turned it off. My phone buzzed, notifications stacked like bricks. Emails from old classmates, text messages from coworkers, even one from a woman I'd gone on 2 dates with last spring. Saw the news. Everything okay? I didn't reply. I threw on my coat and walked down to the coffee shop near the corner of Oak Park Avenue, hoping to get air, something normal. The leaves swirled around my feet like they were mocking me. Inside, I stood in line behind two teenage girls whispering while sneakily pointing their phones at me. When I reached the counter, the barista gave a tight smile. "Hey, you're that guy from the news, right?" I didn't answer. I just turned and left. Coffee forgotten. Back on the street, I walked. Just walked. Faces blurred by. I was a stranger again in the neighborhood I grew up in. My lungs felt tight. Every memory I tried to preserve was turning to smoke. By the time I got to Marlon's office, my jaw was locked and my shoulders were numb from the cold. He opened the door himself. One look at me, and he didn't bother with small talk. "They want you rattled," he said. "They want you to lose it. Blow up in public. Give them more footage." "Well, it's working." He handed me a folder. "Then maybe this will help." Inside was a legal document, not the same will I'd seen before. A different one, signed 8 days before Grandpa passed, dated, witnessed. And Roland's name? Nowhere. I blinked. "Where did this come from?" "Trina," he said. "She found it cleaning out a drawer. Apparently, your grandfather updated it again after Roland stormed out that Thanksgiving." I stared at the date. Something tugged at the edge of my brain. "Thanksgiving," I whispered. That's when I pulled out the old voicemail again, played it for maybe the 10th time, but this time I caught it. 3 coughs, sharp, close to the receiver. Then I remembered the home video I still had, the one from that same Thanksgiving. Bennett had filmed it on his phone. In it, Grandpa was wearing a maroon sweater, same cough pattern. The sweater, the coughs, the date. It matched. The will was real. That night, Marlon and I arranged our own press conference, no fancy podiums, just a fold-out table outside the Cook County Courthouse. Cold wind slapped at my coat as I stepped to the mic. Maybe 20 reporters showed up. More cameras than I expected. I didn't read from a script. "My name is Ellison Rourke," I began, voice steady. "My grandfather didn't forget me. He didn't overlook me. He tried to protect me. And now, I'm doing the same for what he left behind." I held up a copy of the will. I played the video. You could hear the coughs in both. Clear, identical, time-stamped. I finished with this. This isn't about a condo. It's about honesty, about legacy, about a man who knew what his son would do and who trusted me to stop it. The cameras clicked. Reporters shouted. I didn't answer questions. I nodded once and walked away. Across town, Roland sat in his office watching the live stream from behind tinted glasses. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He smirked. Then leaned to his assistant and said, "Cute. Let's see how he handles what's next." But the next hit didn't come from him. It came from someone I'd never expect. The phone rang a little after midnight. I was still in my clothes, sitting on the edge of the bed, the lights off. The streetlights outside cast pale strips across the floor like bars. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe. Karen, her voice came in broken gasps. "Ellison, he dragged me into this. Your father, he forged my name. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." I didn't speak. I let her go on. He said it would all be handled. He told me it was already written, already filed. He said it would protect the family, that if I signed, it would just be clean-up paperwork. He lied. He used my name. Her breath cracked. "I got a notice today. I'm being subpoenaed. I could go to prison for forgery." Then her voice changed, lower, more frantic. "I trusted him. I trusted your father." I stayed quiet. because no words felt right anymore. And maybe, for once, silence was the only truth left between us. By morning, Oak Park had turned somber. Thick clouds moved low over the rooftops, and a slow wind carried the smell of wet concrete. I didn't bother with breakfast, just coffee and a clean shirt. At the courthouse, the press was already waiting, but fewer cameras this time. Maybe people had already lost interest, or maybe, just maybe, they were holding their breath. Marlon walked beside me without saying much. He had the same folder he'd carried since day one. Inside, every document, every discrepancy, every echo of Bennett's voice we'd pulled from the silence they tried to bury him in. The courtroom was cold, functional, not a single photograph on the wall. The judge took her seat. No drama, just protocol. She read through the ruling in a voice stripped of emotion. Based on presented evidence, including notarized documentation dated November 17th, signed and witnessed in accordance with Illinois statute, the court hereby affirms the validity of the revised will of Bennett Rourke, Sr. There was no gasp, no outburst, only a shift in the room, a subtle release of tension. The judge looked toward Roland, who sat stiffer than I'd ever seen him. No suit today. Just a navy sweater and hands that didn't know where to rest. Forgeries were submitted in prior filings, the judge continued. This court recommends charges of estate fraud and elder exploitation be pursued against Roland Rourke. Karen sat 3 rows back. She looked smaller, like something inside her had gone dim. The judge continued. There is insufficient evidence to indict Karen Rourke as a co-conspirator. However, her involvement is noted in the official record. No applause, no fist pumps, just a silence so full it hummed. After the ruling, I didn't go home right away. I needed a minute. And more than that, I needed air. I walked to Bennett's condo. The key felt strange in my hand. I hadn't used it in years. Inside, everything was still, frozen in time. His mail was gone, the fridge empty. But the energy was the same, like he had just stepped out for a walk and would be back soon. I moved through the living room, letting my fingers trail the edge of the old recliner. In the hall closet, hanging right where it had always been, was the maroon sweater, the one from Thanksgiving, the one I'd seen in that video over and over. I pulled it out and held it to my chest. The smell of cedar and faint tobacco lingered. That's when the tears came, quiet at first, then sharp, not from anger or loss, but release, like something inside me had finally stopped fighting. He knew. Grandpa knew. And he'd done what he could, in the end. Later, I stood on the condo's small rooftop balcony. Trina was already up there, leaning against the rail with a blanket wrapped over her shoulders. She didn't turn when I joined her, just sipped from a mug and watched the skyline. He saw you, she said after a long pause. Even if they never did. I nodded. That's enough. We stayed like that for a while, not talking, not needing to. The wind tugged at my coat, but I didn't mind the cold. It felt honest, like the truth had finally found its way through. Before I left, I walked back through the condo one more time. I passed the mantel, the bookshelf, and paused at the old photo frame on the desk. The one with the Thanksgiving picture. All of us around the table, smiling like nothing was broken. Something poked out behind the frame. I pulled it free. A napkin, folded into the shape of a maple leaf. I knew it instantly. That was Bennett's thing. Every Thanksgiving, he folded one for each of us. Somehow, this one had survived. On it, in his handwriting, "Don't let them take what's yours. You earned it." I smiled. He knew exactly what he was doing. Even then, that night, as the wind grew stronger and the lights of the city flickered on across the blocks, I stood once more on the rooftop. Everything looked different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. Betrayal didn't break me. They did worse. They revealed me. And I was still standing.